Hello, Gayani. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you.
Stephanie could not accept the request to become a panelist and had to restart the Zoom. Can you send it to her again? Hopefully it'll work this
Yeah,
time.
let's send it again.
All right. Give me a
So
second. I'll
there's
go
two
back to her.
accounts for Stephanie. We're gonna send. Okay, I think we sent it to the one account.
Okay, great. Let me go check back.
Okay, I think it worked. Essa, go. There she is. Right.
Ah. Genau, ich mache hier oben Start Video.
Okay. Make a description for.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Super. Kannst du
Great,
mir
yes.
dann noch das okay geben, wenn man mich hört?
Ja.
Okay, let's hold out.
Hörst du mich, Dominik?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So let's hold out definitely until
Hallo?
4.
Irgendwie. Ja, ich möchte aber gerne testen, ob es besser ist mit oder ohne Kopfhörer.
Okay, so
When you-
Stephanie would like to test whether her sound quality is better with or without the headset. So let's test it now.
Sure, just so you know.
Now I hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we
Before
can
I
hear
didn't hear you, but now yes. Okay.
Okay, just so you guys know, we are live at the moment, so maybe we wait until 4, see the participants come in, and then we can begin.
Yep.
Yes,
Sounds great.
perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Okay, so it's 4:01. Gayani, what do you think? Should we start or should we wait a bit longer for more people to arrive?
Let me check the participants. Why don't we give it another 3 minutes just to allow everyone to get in?
All right, then
Thank you.
let's start at 5:05.
Perfect.
Okay, so I think let's start. Welcome everybody to this second talk of the AUA and WSL Foraca talk series. My name is Dominik Braunschweiger. I am the Foraca project coordinator at the Swiss Federal Research Institute for Snow, Forest and Landscape Research, WSL. And the goal of this shared talk series between AUA and WSL in the context of the SDC-sponsored Foraca project is to foster the academic exchange between the Swiss research and Armenian research. And in preparation for the COP17, which will take place in October this year in Yerevan, this coming presentation, as well as the next 3 presentations, will all focus on topics of biodiversity. Thank you all very much for being here. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you my colleague Stefanie Schwab. Stephanie is a political scientist who explores how human and ecological needs can be better aligned through local planning and sustainable governance. She has a background in qualitative policy and applied research, and she has a lot of experience in investigating how local actors and institutions shape sustainable transformations in urban and rural contexts. Today, she will present her findings from her research into how planning can be relevant for biodiversity based on lessons from Swiss municipal land use plan revisions. Thank you also very much once again to Alen Amirkian as well as Gayani for working together with us on this talk series and organizing everything, setting this meeting up. I'm very happy to be here. Stephanie will present for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we will have about 20 minutes for discussion and questions. And with that, I give the word to you, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Dominic, for this kind introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes, your sound is
perfect. So hello, everyone, and thank you for having me, and thank you for being here. Shall I directly share the screen?
Yes, go ahead.
Can you see it now in the presentation mode?
It's still in the normal mode, so we see your entire PowerPoint window.
Okay, so I try again. Okay.
Yes, now it's in the presentation mode.
Perfect. So thank you very much once again. And let's see how we can go on. So today I'm presenting the findings of our 2 years research project on integrating biodiversity-friendly standards into local land use planning. And yes, the central question of this topic was straightforward. What enables and what hinders the implementation of biodiversity-friendly policies at the municipal level? And in this presentation, I will focus on the key levers of promoting biodiversity through planning regulations. In other words, we will look at how cities and municipalities can actively integrate biodiversity into land use planning and into local regulations and planning decisions. So this is why the talk is entitled Planning for Biodiversity, because local planning is not just a technical exercise, it is a powerful instrument for shaping how we live within the ecosystem that sustains us. When we aim to identify levers to promote biodiversity, just a second. No. So when we aim to identify levers to promote biodiversity, one of the key approaches is to look at the drivers of biodiversity loss. One of the main drivers of biodiversity loss at the global level is land use change. In Switzerland, around 1 square meter per second is built up every second. This occurs mainly at the cost of agricultural land, but also at the cost of green spaces in settlement areas. Now, several developments are putting increased pressure on urban green spaces. On one side, municipalities need to provide housing, infrastructure, and services for a growing population. At the same time, private landowners and investors aim to maximize building volumes and returns on land. On the regulatory side, the Federal Spatial Planning Act encourages building within existing settlement areas to keep towns compact and avoid spreading into the countryside, into the landscape. Together, these pressures intensify competition for green spaces within settlement areas. As a result, municipalities face a central planning challenge. Municipalities must implement densification within existing settlement boundaries, while also preserving green spaces that are essential for biodiversity and for human well-being. So the role of spatial planning is to coordinate and regulate how land is used. It is also increasingly recognized as an important tool for biodiversity conservation and promotion. This consensus is expressed, for example, in the 2030 targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In particular, Target 1 calls on countries to plan and manage all areas to reduce biodiversity loss, and Target 14 aims at integrating biodiversity into decision-making. In Switzerland, these international targets are implemented through the Swiss Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. Relevant measures for today's topic include promoting biodiversity in settlement areas and also integrating biodiversity into decision-making and planning processes. Finally, national and cantonal laws provide the framework for environmental protection and spatial planning. I must go on. Finally, national and cantonal laws provide the framework for environmental protection and spatial planning, and local planning must operate within this framework. Now, at the municipal level, building and zoning ordinances are a key planning instrument in Switzerland and also in other places. Municipalities use these ordinances to define where construction is allowed and where blue and green spaces are preserved. But why are these regulations so powerful? Building and zoning ordinances are legally binding for property owners. Municipal authorities use these ordinances as the legal basis to approve or deny building permits. This is exactly where global and national biodiversity targets are meant to be translated into local action. Despite their importance, however, we still know little about how biodiversity is actually considered in local planning regulations. Because municipalities are required to revise these ordinances approximately every 15 years, these revisions offer a particularly valuable opportunity to study biodiversity policy integration in practice. In our study, we addressed 3 questions. First, which biodiversity-friendly standards are adopted in building and zoning ordinances, and how have these standards changed over time? Second, at which stages of the revision process are biodiversity-friendly standards introduced, modified, or removed? And third, which factors foster or hinder the integration of these standards into local planning regulations? Now, a little bit of background. The project was funded by the ETH board as part of the Blue-Green Biodiversity Research Initiative. Our team brought together experts in biodiversity conservation, aquatic ecology, and spatial planning from 2 Swiss research institutes: the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow and Landscape Research, WSL, and the EAWAG Institute for Water Aquatic Research. The research program led to several peer-reviewed scientific publications, and in addition, we prepared a concise summary report for practitioners and other interested professionals. It's available in German and French. To study these questions that I mentioned before, we used the concept of biodiversity policy integration, also referred to as biodiversity mainstreaming. Biodiversity policy integration is the incorporation of biodiversity goals into sectoral policies. Land use plan revisions are embedded in a multi-level governance system where municipalities, can you see that? Where municipalities lead the planning and implementation. That's the core. They have the core responsibility during the land use plan revisions, and the cantons assess and approve the revised regulations, whereas the federal level sets the legal framework without their authorities being directly involved. Within the revision process, we identified 4 key stages as theoretical windows of opportunity to biodiversity to be introduced. First, the drafting stage, where local officials write the first version of the new regulation, often supported by a private consulting firm. And what is also happening in this stage is informal consultation of the residents through surveys, for examples, or events. Then the second stage is the formal participation stage, where residents can suggest changes to the draft regulation in a formal procedure that is mandatory for all municipalities by law. So people have the chance to submit requests on what should be changed in the draft regulation. Then the third stage is the cantonal pre-assessment, where the canton checks legal compliance with cantonal and federal law. Here the canton, which is basically the district level, the medium level in the federation, the cantons may request to modify the draft. And finally, the parliamentary stage. Here, the municipal parliament debates and votes on the final draft before the revised ordinance is handed to the canton for the final approval. Our empirical analysis is based on 6 medium-sized Swiss municipalities across 3 cantons that recently revised their land use plans. These were Bruck, Buchs, Emmen, Horf, Efretikon, and Wädenswil. We combined, you see where they are located here on the map of Switzerland. We combined document analysis with semi-structured interviews with planners and municipal authorities. The document analysis included old and new ordinances, as well as official reports that document each of these 4 stages of the revision process in each municipality. This allowed us not only to identify formal regulatory changes, but also to understand the decision-making dynamics behind them. Let's turn to the results. To identify which types of biodiversity-friendly standards municipalities adopt, we used a mixed deductive-inductive approach. We started with key concepts from urban ecology and nature-based solutions literature, and then refined and expanded them based on our data. Through this process, we identified 7 overarching dimensions of biodiversity-friendly standards. The preservation and promotion of urban green spaces, including connectivity, ensuring ecological quality of urban green, and the protection and promotion of trees and hedges. Then the protection and promotion of aquatic habitats, the protection of soil, minimizing light pollution, and animal-friendly buildings. Now, first, we compared old and new ordinances to understand how biodiversity considerations have evolved over time. In the first column, you can see the 16 distinct biodiversity-friendly standards we identified within these 7 dimensions. The second column shows how often each standard appeared in the older ordinances, while the third column shows their inclusion in the newly revised versions. Comparing old and new ordinances, we clearly see an increase in biodiversity-friendly standards included. In the older ordinances, 14 out of 16 standards were represented at least once, whereas after revision, all 16 standards are present in at least 2 of the new ordinances. Looking more closely at the new ordinances, 5 standards have been adopted by all 6 municipalities. These are green area ratios, greening rooftops, preserving urban green areas, mandatory plans for building surroundings, and provisions for ecological planting and landscaping. In contrast, the least frequently addressed standard was the limitation of underground construction. As for changes over time, most standards have seen increased adoption, especially the preservation of urban green and provisions for animal-friendly buildings. Now I would like to showcase you one aspect more closely, the green area ratios. The green area ratio is the share of green space in the plot area. These are unsealed natural or planted surfaces like lawns, flower beds, hedges, but no rooftop greening and no car parks because there the soil is covered. The green area ratio tells us about the quantity of green around the building, but not about the ecological quality of the green area around the building. So it's a quantitative aspect. The concept was defined as part of an intercantonal agreement on the harmonization of building terms. Due to that agreement, many municipalities integrated or adapted green area ratios into their building and zoning regulation. But how exactly? All of the 6 case municipalities included in our study have defined green area ratios for specific zoning areas. These ratios range from 10 to 45%. They are mainly applied in residential zones, mixed-use zones, and industrial zones. However, both the required share of green space and the way these regulations have evolved differ considerably between the municipalities. In Wädenswil, a green area ratio was introduced for the first time. In Bruck and Horv, the required ratio was increased. In Efretikon, it remained unchanged compared to the previous regulation. In Emmen, the ratio was reduced. And in Buchs, the green area ratio in the industrial zone was abolished, while a new ratio was introduced in a residential zone named Garden City. So we have quite a variation in how they adopted it, but all of them adopted a green area ratio somehow. At this point, you might ask how these regulations are actually formulated. Let me give you a few examples. Some provisions include measurable quantitative targets. For example, they may require at least 1 tree per 300 square meters of plot area, which is not much, by the way. Other provisions are more qualitative in nature. For instance, they may require the use of predominantly native and site-appropriate plant species. Another example is the obligation to extensively green flat roofs. So we've seen that biodiversity-friendly standards have been adopted in all the case municipalities. But how did these standards actually make their way into the regulations during the revision process? To explore this, I'll give you two examples from our case municipalities. Here you see the 16 biodiversity-friendly standards listed in the left-hand column. Next to that, you'll find the old ordinance, followed by the 4 key stages of the revision process, and finally the new ordinance. The color coding helps you track what happened to each standard. Gray means the standard is included. Light green shows a newly introduced standard. Dark green means the standard was enhanced. Light pink indicates it was weakened, and dark pink means the standard was removed. In this example from Bruck, a municipality in the Canton Aargau, you can see that the total number of biodiversity-friendly standards increased from the old to the new ordinance. You also see that during draft stage, many new standards have been introduced. In the formal participation and the cantonal assessment stage, only a few changes were made. The parliamentary stage, however, was more dynamic. Several standards were modified, and even 2 new standards were introduced. In Wädenswil, we also observe an overall increase in biodiversity-friendly standards. As in the previous case, several new standards were introduced during the drafting stage. However, unlike Bruck, we see that many of these standards were weakened in the later stages, particularly during cantonal assessment and parliamentary debates. In fact, the original draft was quite progressive, let's say, and went beyond cantonal legal requirements in some areas. But because of legal coherence, several of these ambitious provisions had to be eliminated or scaled back. Despite these setbacks, however, the final ordinance still includes more biodiversity-friendly elements than the old version, and this is important to say. However, it falls short of the original draft's ambition. For example, the green area ratio in the residential zones was reduced from 60% in the draft version to 35% in the final version. 3 protection measures were removed entirely, but still there's an increase. So it's all, the devil lies in the details, let's say. So what can we learn from these examples? We found that the drafting stage is key for introducing new standards. This makes the draft stage a key moment also for agenda setting for the municipality when it comes to biodiversity. We observed that most of the municipalities used this opportunity to introduce provisions that support biodiversity. In contrast, the later stages, such as formal participation and cantonal assessment, led to only minor adjustments to the draft. These stages often involved some form of fine-tuning rather than major changes. However, both formal participation and the cantonal preliminary assessment led to a strengthening of the biodiversity-friendly standards. So it was still an improving of the direction. Finally, the parliamentary stage led to very different outcomes, depending on the political composition of the local parliament and the level of conflicting interests about land use. We observed 3 types of outcomes. In 2 cases, no amendments were made at all. The draft passed unchanged through the parliament. In another 2 municipalities, we saw moderate amendments with a mix of strengthening and weakening biodiversity-related provisions. In the last two cases, the draft underwent major modifications, as in the two examples I showed you before. So we've taken a closer look inside the black box of land use plan revision process. But what actually enables or hinders the integration of biodiversity-friendly standards during the revision? Based on the scientific literature, we had already identified several barriers and enabling factors for integrating biodiversity into land use planning. Our empirical research confirmed some of these factors, partially supported others, and also identified additional aspects through the interviews and document analysis. This slide summarizes which factors known from the literature were confirmed, which were only partly supported, and which new factors emerged from our study. All of these factors were mentioned in the interviews, and some were also reflected in the analyzed planning documents. To highlight a few points, expert knowledge plays a crucial role, especially when planners or administrative staff brings biodiversity expertise directly into the planning process. Participatory procedures and advocacy, for example, by nature conservation associations or political actors, also support biodiversity policy integration. Cross-sectoral cooperation was confirmed as an enabling factor both at the municipal and the cantonal levels. However, such cooperation was not present in all municipalities. This suggests that while cross-sectoral collaboration can be helpful, it is not a decisive factor on its own. National legislation and cantonal strategic plans supported biodiversity integration, particularly in the designation and protection of watercourse areas, and in preventing upzoning and greenfield development. At the same time, when municipal autonomy was restricted, this was perceived as a barrier. So the municipal autonomy was different depending on the cantonal building legislation. One additional factor that emerged from our study was the strategic use of synergies with other policy fields, such as climate adaptation. This can act as a powerful lever. Interestingly, even potentially conflicting policy goals such as densification can create funding opportunities for biodiversity measures. So this means when a building was abolished and rebuilt, they maybe can build higher, but the ecological quality of the surroundings must be also higher. So this is meant by leveraging densification policies to increase biodiversity-friendly environment. We also increased awareness. We also observed increasing awareness among local governments, citizens, and organizations of the biodiversity crisis and related ecological and climate risks. So we saw that especially in the interviews, but also in the participation reports and in the parliamentary debates, this increased awareness. On the other hand, when it comes to the barriers, one key barrier was the opposition to regulation, so often reflecting political resistance linked to private interests. And and concerns about the feasibility, let's say, particularly regarding the costs of certain measures or the practical challenges in implementing the standards. For example, the need to control whether there are the hedges or the bushes that were promised. So notably, this aspect emerged only from the interviews, which is plausible given its practical nature. Let's come to the conclusion. In the examples we've seen, biodiversity-friendly standards are increasingly integrated into building and zoning ordinances. This especially applies for green spaces, green roofs, and ecological landscaping, which is the surroundings of the buildings. Land use plan revisions can therefore be seen as a window of opportunity for biodiversity policy integration. Our research shows that the drafting stage is a crucial entry point for embedding biodiversity into land use regulations. Crucial factors for the adoption of biodiversity-friendly standards were synergies with other policies, such as climate adaptation and stormwater management, participative procedures, and the inclusion of expert knowledge. However, many regulations apply only to specific zones, and institutional capacity for enforcement remains constrained. Overall, we need to better understand how these standards are implemented in practice to assess their impact, because of course, municipalities need to really stick to these regulations when giving building permits. So the implementation is crucial for the impact. That's clear. Our findings are promising. They show that municipalities are moving into the right direction, increasingly taking biodiversity into account. But we must be clear, these are minimum standards. So it's not about adding a bit of green to the building. That's not enough to protect ecosystems. Oops, I see that it didn't take, unfortunately, you cannot see what is written in the chart. I don't know why. But based on our findings, we recommend that municipalities systematically consider the 7 dimensions of biodiversity-friendly standards that we identified. These are the 7 standards that you have already seen. So it's about the green spaces, the quality of green spaces, the trees and hedges, the protection of aquatic areas, and protection of soil, the limiting light pollution, and the animal-friendly buildings. So these dimensions provide a structured framework. In addition, biodiversity integration should not stop at these dimensions. Further layers can be considered, for example, avoiding water and air pollution through toxic substances and emissions, provide public transportation, and encouraging the use of ecological building materials to reuse and to recycle. However, municipalities should adapt them to their local contexts. Some of these measures can be integrated directly into the building and zoning ordinances. Others may be addressed through specific regulatory instruments on pollution, for example. Finally, there are what I call low-hanging fruits, measures that municipalities can implement without major legislative reform or high administrative burden. These include greening measures along streets, such as preserving trees, planting new trees, creating flower meadows with native seeds. They also include greening measures on buildings, for example, green roofs, green facades, and vegetated walls. Other practical steps are ecological landscaping in parks and residential surroundings, increasing habitat diversity, and so on, converting parking spaces into green areas with trees and open soil, for example. These measures are relatively simple, but they can significantly improve urban biodiversity and climate resilience. If municipalities use these opportunities strategically, local planning can become a powerful driver of biodiversity protection. And with this, I conclude. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you again, Stephanie, for your very interesting presentation. I think probably the easiest way to go through the Q&A is for people to write their questions or comments in the chat, and then I will read them, and Stephanie can answer them. So we have a first question by Alan already. Thank you very much for sharing your very interesting research. To what extent are municipal standards aligned with Switzerland's NBSAP? I assume this is the National Biodiversity Strategy, or national biodiversity objectives. So to what extent is a well-integrated multi-level governance system in place on biodiversity in Switzerland? Stephanie, what do you think?
That's a good question. I did not specifically check for whether the targets of the Swiss biodiversity strategy and action plans are met, but this research we did is actually, it's not, let's say, part of the strategy and action plan because it's not like directly mandated, but in the biodiversity strategy and action plan, there is the measure that biodiversity should be included into local land use planning, what we were actually really looking at, whether they are doing that. So your question was more on whether there's a systematic way of implementing, and I cannot really truly answer this question based on my research because I didn't check that, but there's other research looking on that. And as I mentioned, there are different, let's say, checks or like assessments between the different levels of federation, between the municipality and the cantonal level, for example, to really check that the legal framework really refers to the upper level. And in the case I researched on, it works quite well because, for example, when it comes to the protection of rivers and watercourses, there was this federal legislation which was revised, according to which the cantons and municipalities need to define the watercourse areas. This means not only the stream, but left and right from the riverbank, additional space for the water to move, because a lot of streams were canalized in Switzerland, so they want to give them more space again in order to foster restoration. And this law was taken into account both on the cantonal level and here in these municipal regulations that I showed you. So in this case, I researched it. It works quite well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Next question. It seems to have disappeared again. No, there it is. So was the year difference between all the old and new ordinances that you researched always 15 years, or was there sometimes a different differential?
It was not always exactly 15 years, because the revision also takes quite a long time. It takes around 5 years approximately from the beginning to the end. So it varied a little bit between, let's say, 12 and maybe 16, 17 years.
Another question, unfortunately, it was in the chat and not in the Q&A, so I can't see by whom. But the question is, have you ever thought about applying the widely applied 3-30-300 concept during the landscaping of the neighborhood areas? I myself am not familiar with this concept. I'm not sure if you know it, Stephanie.
3-30-300.
Yes.
No, I actually don't know what you're referring to. You mean the 30 per 30 targets of the global biodiversity frame that talks about preserving 30% of protected areas, something like that. But I didn't refer to that because it's our research concerns the settlement areas, and yeah, those targets are more concerning the protected areas. But maybe that's not what you asked.
Arsen, maybe you can quickly specify in the chat whether that answers your question or whether this is a different concept that you meant. In the meantime, let's see. As Alan commented that it would be interesting to see the targets set by the Swiss National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan and how much the municipal action helps Switzerland meet its targets. I agree, it would be very interesting. But I think, as you said, that's not what you specifically researched, right, Stephanie?
Sorry, I reread the other question in the chat. Can you repeat this one?
So basically, it's not so much a question, but a comment that it would be interesting to the municipal action contributes to the fulfillment of Switzerland's biodiversity targets, essentially.
Yeah, that would be very important to research. Yeah, I think some research is done on the monitoring of the biodiversity strategy and action plan. There is a monitoring on that, but I'm not familiar in detail with that. Yeah, thank you.
So Arsen specified the 3-30-300 concept is about 3 trees visible from any window of the building, 30% of tree cover near the building, and 300 meters distance from a nearby park. So I guess this would be the target for every new building. Did you work with this concept at all?
No, but that's thank you for mentioning it. Yeah, I've heard about it. I would need to think about how I could integrate that, but it's interesting. Yeah, thank you for mentioning it. So
you also haven't come across any of these 6 municipalities that you looked at applying this concept?
No, not at all, because I mean, this is, as to my knowledge, it's discussed in the scientific community or maybe in the IPES, like on the biodiversity framework. But to be honest, on the municipal level, they don't have time to follow the scientific discussions. And so, but yes, nonetheless, it would be probably possible to introduce. I just need to reflect, the building and zoning ordinances are quite a technical regulation. It's about building heights, and I would need to think about it if it's really possible to write it like this in the regulation, whether it would make sense. But probably yes. Yeah.
I thought it was actually maybe an unofficial part of Swiss building regulations that all residential areas should be within a certain distance of a recreative forest area. Is that not officially the case? Is that just something unofficial? Do you know?
I don't know.
Armin Bartsumian asked, how do you feel about the additional measures for the conservation of red book plants?
Additional measures for conservation of highly endangered plants, you mean, the red book plants?
Yes, I assume that's what meant by the red. Yeah, I assume it's about the red list of threatened species.
Yes, you know, I mean, again, we're in the settlement areas, and of course, in most of municipalities also have protected areas on their, let's say, on their area. But I didn't check for, my focus was on the settlement area, and the question would be, is the settlement area itself the right place to take protecting measures for endangered species? Yes, it can be, because the settlement area is very important for biodiversity, because it can provide alternative habitats which are similar to natural habitats, and it can be especially for protected species. In the regulations I looked at, there are some protection measures for orchids. Yeah, and probably like meadows, special meadows, but this is already at the habitat level and not at the species level. So it can be a good approach, but it was not widely applied to specifically focus on endangered species. But I must say, we are looking at the building and zoning ordinances, and this is about building and planning. It's not the protection regulation. There might be a nature protection regulation on the cantonal level, or even maybe some municipal ordinances on that. But this is actually at the cantonal level, the protection in Switzerland. And there might be some like measures, but I cannot see them in the regulation I looked at, because it has a slightly different focus.
Thank you. Thank you also very much for your questions and comments. Are there any more questions? I'm not currently seeing anything in the chat. Okay, I think if there are no more questions, then once again, thank you all very much for coming to this presentation. Thank you, Stefanie, for telling us about your research. And thank you to Alain Gayani for setting this up, and to the Faraka project for financing this project and kickstarting this cooperation. I'm looking forward to the next presentation. And until then, I wish you a great start of spring. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic.
Bye. Thank you.